Now we turn to a work session that is on ARPA funding. And this is following the Board of Health meeting. It is Wednesday, August 10th at 9:32 a.m. And we are constituted here as the Clark County Council. And we are to have a work session that covers a number of things, particular emphasis on requests for ARPA funding in the future, so that we can make some decisions to advise staff on how to go forward from here. So Kathleen Otto, would you care to give an introduction?
Certainly. So the council's been engaged in conversations with regards to priorities for the ARPA funding that we have received. Last week, I believe, we had a conversation on what was already committed and spent and what is available for future consideration for the council. So the spreadsheet in front of you identifies the conversation from last week, where it identifies I think it's 11 or 12 items of consideration from council, either requests from outside, internally, or by councilors, with requested dollar amounts and a summary. We did go over what each of those items were last week. The goal today is to receive direction from council on any commitments. We do have draft staff reports for all of these. Any direction given to staff, whether it's a full amount or partial, we will include these staff reports on Tuesday's agenda next week to ensure that the public also has an opportunity to provide feedback in a public meeting. So with that said, I can turn it over to you, Chair, if you want to continue the conversation. We do have Mark Gassaway here in the hearing room that can provide some details. We do have members joined virtually who have specific expertise on all of these items, and I believe the spreadsheet that's up is interactive, so we can make any changes and capture that information during the work session this morning.
Thank you, Kathleen. Well, how to proceed is an interesting challenge with 12 different points on which we need to make decisions on each one. So I would suggest the following, if this is okay with council. And let's look at those items that we definitely wish to continue at this time. And then we could make a decision on them, and that would eliminate some of the 12 from discussion today. Then we could go to those that we definitely wish to eliminate or hold over to a future discussion time, and that would eliminate a few for us to be able to focus then on those on which we have discussion and questions. Does that sound okay?
Madam Chair, I would suggest that we hear, I think we had at least one presenter that wished to make a comment, and that we should hear from anyone that wishes to speak up about these projects before we begin our discussion.
Staff, I'm looking for the agenda. When is the time for public comment?
Due to the fact that this is a work session, there is no public comments, and since council will be taking final action next week, that's when the public comment would be incorporated.
So we had, I assume, one person that wanted to speak up from the YMCA, and it would seem backward if we eliminated projects without hearing from people that wanted to comment on them first.
Chair, I would support. Sorry, go ahead, Councillor.
While I do hear and don't entirely disagree with the perspective that we should hear from folks, for the purposes of procedure and not setting precedent we may not want to set, a work session is a work session where we don't take public comment. Since this isn't a final decision, I don't support in a work session bringing in public comment. I think that is just procedurally not a direction we should go. And since there will be the opportunity for public comment at a hearing before this is approved. I suggest we stick with procedure and protocol in place.
I'm inclined to agree with you on that, Councillor Lentz. And I would point out that on our council time agenda today, we do have public comment, but it is only on agenda items, which this is not. So the work session, I should say, is not an agenda item at council time today, although it will be later. So I'm sorry, but I think that is the best approach at this time. We always get into a difficult situation when we go against our standard procedure, and I think that is the case here as well. So I'd like to go ahead, if we may, looking at the list and realizing that we have quite a bit of time in which to make final decisions. I understand, and I'm not sure if you mentioned this, Kathleen, that ARPA monies must be committed by December 31 of 2024. That is not today, it is not at our next meeting, but at the end of December 2024, and then they need to be expended by the end of 2026. So if there are some items on which we feel like, yes, maybe, but not now, that would be fine for us to put it off until a later time, even if it is not picked up at this next meeting of council. Just want to make that point because that does probably affect how we go forward. Are there any items on this list that council would like to say, yes, we need to have this on the list now?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilor Rylander.
I'd like to actually share my thoughts on items that should be kept on and items that may be put off or removed, if I may.
Let's start with those that would be kept on.
So I would request that items 8 and 10, that is the North County EMS request and the Battleground Aquatic Center, remain on the list for consideration and discussion.
I would disagree with that. I think those are some of the newest ads, and we haven't even really had any substantive conversation about them. I'd prefer, Chair, that we start with those that we already know we've had some more substantive conversations about, and then we can maybe move on to these newer items. Just my thoughts.
You know, I caught the gist of what you were saying, Councilor Olson, but not all of the substance. I'm sorry. Could I ask you to repeat?
Yes, sorry. I would disagree with talking about and leaving these two items on the list right now because we haven't really even spoken in detail about them. And then I would hope that we could maybe focus on those items that we've spent some more time discussing with regard to keeping them on the list or not keeping them on the list. I think maybe a little bit more discussion could be had on the Aquatic Center and the North Country EMS, but those are newer items, and I would not be in favor of leaving them on the list. And I know we haven't really talked about them in detail, so I would prefer that from a process perspective that we look at those items that we've already had more substantive discussion about.
Do you have a suggestion on what one or two of those items would be? I do not hear you.
Sorry, if we go back up to the top, I don't have my spreadsheet open yet. So I think the Children's Justice Center request is one that we've considered, and I think that's one that we have agreed, at least from my perspective, that I would encourage us to keep that on the list. I think the internal services request certainly needs additional detail and discussion, but it should stay on the list in my view. So I would say the top 4 and 5 right there should stay on the list. And I'll just let other folks chime in at that point. I also am in favor of the treasurer's request for the $2 million for the loans, item 7. And I'll let others.
Let's pop up back to number 1. what are the feelings on the Children's Justice Center as far as yay or nay? Counselor Olson is yay. Are there others who say yes?
Yes.
So, Madam Chair, I would, one, like to say yes on the Children's Justice Center, but two, this is really where we earn our money. You know, making these decisions where the cutoff will be ultimately, and whether that 40 million stays as 40 million. I mean, that project alone, or projects, is going to far exceed 40 million. At the very beginning of this process, when we first were allocated this money, and by the way, we really haven't had any conversations at all with the cities on their ARPA money and how we could join forces, although it was briefly mentioned at our ECHO meeting yesterday on how the cities could participate with their ARPA money with ours. This is hard. And from the very beginning, I wanted to strike a balance between how we remediated for individuals, nonprofits, you know, getting money back out into the community for people that were hurt through all the COVID and COVID mandates that really hurt businesses and private enterprise and people in other ways. On the other hand, it was really an opportunity that I was hoping that we could build things, lasting things. You know, whether it was the railroad, and the railroad never made it on the list, I wish it had, or an airport, which I had had a lot of conversations with the port and our county manager over. I saw those as legacy projects that would have lasted for generations and would have been a good short-term infusion of cash. We still have some examples of that, from broadband to the YMCA. And you know, no one really likes to talk about jails and spend money on jails, but you know, that'll solve a big problem for the county. So, you know, overall, I would like to see all of these approved, but we don't obviously have that much money available to us. So one of the things that I've been trying to bring up is, okay, what are the alternatives? So for North County, the EMS building, I understood there were other alternatives for infrastructure money for that building. You know, this amount of money should be limited to those places where we don't have any other pots of money to fulfill a justified need. And all of these are justified. All of these will be beneficial, some in the short term, but you know, we want the best bang for our buck. So I just wanted to make that overarching statement because we're still trying to get that right balance between investing back in people that were hurt during the pandemic, investing into capital projects. I mean, you know, looking back, I wish we had not invested $10 million in IT. I think that sticks out like a sore thumb, where we overinvested in one particular area. You know, I've been very involved in that $15 million plus that we invested in the homeless situation, and that's off to a slow start. And I don't know that we're going to seek any long-term benefits from that. I'm unhappy to say. I don't think we've seen the Holy Grail, but that it's still at the very beginning. I'm hoping that was a good short-term investment to really make a dent in our homeless situation. And I'm hoping that was not in an overinvestment. But so I just wanted to make those general comments. You know, as we go down the list, suddenly we're going to be out of money, and maybe we should talk about whether these new projects should remain on the list. I did send an email out to everyone because I just received it from the Port of Kamaswashugal. I've been, over the years, as you know, working with different entities trying to get broadband out into the rural community, District 4 and 5. The Port of Richfield is doing great work, and now they're partnering with Woodland. I was trying to see if the Port of Kamaswashugal was going to join with the other ports, because we had put out the hue and cry to private vendors, hey, we need this infrastructure. now's a good time to have a public-private partnership. We only had one taker, and that was Comcast. So, some of this could still be a placeholder amount of money, and maybe joining with the ports in the near future would be the way forward to spend this ARPA money, which has been invested nationally in broadband. So I'm not sure. I think we should have some overarching discussions on where we're heading instead of just going line by line until we run out of money. I'm not sure that's the best approach.
I think that's actually not what we're trying to do now, but to focus on those specific items that council would like to see continued. And I did hear 3 for line item 1, the Children's Justice Center. So for the August 16 council meeting, I believe that would say to us, Kathleen, that we would look for the staff report on that item on the 16th, correct? And
Yes, and if you want the full dollar amount on there as well, yes, we will have that on the August 16th meeting.
yes, and then a final decision would be made then as to yay or nay and the amount, correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay, good. Councilor Olson had also mentioned line item 2 for the clerk with the continuation of overtime. Is there anyone else who wishes to support that as an item definitely going forward? Okay, let's pass on that one right now. For the $40 million on the facilities building reconfiguration project, how many others would like to see that item go forward so that we can hear more about it at 8/6 on August 16 and then make a decision on as to what we're going to do, even if it is at that time postponing?
Okay, so I was going to recommend maybe that we don't keep this, excuse me, on the list for August 16th, but that we put it on a list of future work session discussion. That we don't take action one way or the other on it, because obviously we're going to need some significant detail on what this would entail. So my thought might be that we just take it out of the conversation today, but put it on its own separate work session.
I would support that. Would another counselor like to as well?
I do as well. I think we need a significant placeholder here. $40 million may be just the wrong amount, but this is aging infrastructure and other issues that we need to remediate, and this money will go a long way. I'm just not confident that the amount is the right amount. And if it was, for instance, $20 million, that would give us $20 million to legacy projects that will be new projects and new additions to the county. So I would agree with Councilor Olson and the chair that this needs its own focus.
So staff, if you could schedule that for a future work session, and there may be other items as well. I'd like to point to the one that Councilor Rylander mentioned on the North Country EMS, in that I would like to see that for a future work session, simply because I had heard that there may be other ways to approach that other than through ARPA funds. And if that's the case, I'd like to see that explored in a work session. Would others like to see that as well for that item?
Madam Chair, I would be eager to learn if there are other sources. I think I previously mentioned I made a visit to Yakult to meet with the head of the EMS services, and we had an extensive discussion about alternative sources of funding that he'd been pursuing for the last several years, and he was coming up against a brick wall. So if there are other sources, that would be worth knowing or understanding. Otherwise, it has to flip back to ARPA if we're going to support it.
Understanding it would be the point of the work session. Exactly. Thank you.
So I understand Mark Gassaway.
Because that is the point. Are there others who would like to see that at a work session?
To the point Council just made, I think
3.
Mark Gassaway is present and he was the one that immediately came up with alternative pathways to start to pursue. So, I mean, before we vote 3,
Which we already
Mark-
did.
does Mark have?
I know you'd like to hear from Mark, and let's hear from Mark during that work session, because that way we can find out more about what are the alternatives there. Are there, let's see, Councilor Olson, you had mentioned item 4, the COVID cleaning services, that be allowed to move forward to the 8/16 session. Are there others who concur?
I do.
And I do as well. So that would move forward, Kathleen, to August 16 with the staff report then. Superior Court. No one had mentioned that at this point that I recall. Is there anyone who wishes to support that as an item that would move forward to 8/16?
I'd be fine
Madam
with
Chair.
seeing that move forward.
Councilor Rylander?
I guess what I don't have is good understanding of the detail of what value that brings to their ability to process cases, move people through the system, et cetera. So I could be supportive. It's not a lot of money, so long as I understood what the value was going to be.
Madam Chair, I would also be supportive of moving that forward.
As would I, and let's target the question that you asked, Councilor Rylander, for our discussion on 8/16. I find that too as critical. So Kathleen, if you would make note, please, of that question so that we're sure to get a response to that. Councilor Olson, I believe it was, had mentioned the $2 million with the treasurer in line item 7. Is there anyone else who would like to see that move forward?
Madam Chair.
I actually would.
I would too.
Okay, let's move that one forward to the 16th.
And Madam Chair, I didn't purposely skip line 6. I just didn't want to control the whole thing. So I would also be in favor of line 6 with the delinquent property tax discussion.
As would I.
Others? I support that as well. I find it to be directly related to the purpose of the funds. And that's one of the reasons why I would like to explore it further on the 16th. Sorry, I'm taking some notes here. Broadband.
Madam Chair, can I make some comments regarding the broadband?
Yes, Councilor Rylander.
So I haven't been at this piece as long as you guys have in the discussion. I have done some recent digging. It's my understanding from Lindsay that there is a work effort going on in the background that in the next 2 to 3 months should generate a report showing in rural Clark County what the high-speed alternative broadband opportunities exist or may exist over the next several years. I think having that report is critical and essential, because when I look at the fact that Comcast has stepped up, that's terrific. But when I look at the fact that we're talking about 500 passings for a county investment of $4.6 million, all in, that's about $13,000 per passing. And when I look at that, I did the math, assuming that they charged $50 a month on an ongoing service and their margin was 40%. If my math is correct, it would take a little over 54 years to recover the investment. And I think that for this amount of money, as much as I would love to push broadband forward at this point, I don't think it's the best use of the funds reaching the broadest possible population to get the maximum benefit. So I would suggest that the money could be reallocated to other projects that are on the list, especially given the fact that we appear to have about an $8 million delta between what we have available in the way of funds and the requests for funds. Thank you.
Are there others who would see this item as a no for now?
I see it as a yes, and I'd like to speak to it.
Okay, go ahead, Councilor.
So I don't disagree with the comments that Councilor Rylander made, but I want to add to it that does then take us in a different direction. So we're talking about a backbone, cable, some of which, is being labeled, as fiber dark, the dark fiber. These 500 households are the neighborhood that they know they have users that are underserved and will be immediately served. So that's 5,000 households, not 500 households, not 500 people, but households. But the backbone itself, the 31 miles of fiber, is expandable and would be expected to be expandable. It's from their hub in Vancouver, it then digs out, pushes out into Northeast Battleground area where we know we need service. Then it can push out to other neighborhoods because the fiber optic will carry much more. It's scalable. It's really just equipment to then add the different users once the other neighborhoods can be added on. We have an industrial area that's adjacent that perhaps someday we'll actually get to that to see its capability put to use. It's going to need broadband. It's an economic driver. Companies want broadband. They need high-speed internet. It's an attraction. It has built whole cities and driven development in other areas of the country once it's put in ahead of time, the infrastructure. So there's more benefits in the short term than just the 500 initial families served. We have no other partners right now. This is a specific project. At the very least, I would ask that we have a placeholder here to see if there are any other projects that emerge, whether it's a partnership with the ports or some other providers comes up on the net and says, hey, we've got a solution. We want to join with you. We know we have documented the need from remote businesses to children needing to dial in from home. In any case, that's my argument for it. I have supported this. I've been looking for different resourcing for it. It will attract future grants if we show the state how we are leaning forward in enlarging broadband. It is a common use of ARPA funds throughout the counties throughout the United States.
Lindsay, what is the timing that you anticipate on this item for having more definitive information?
So if the council approves funds for rural broadband, we will need to go out for a public RFP process. The proposed project that Comcast could do for this particular dollar amount, they anticipate would take about 18 months from the time that they receive the funds until the time that the project is completed. But we would need to go out for public bid. We would need to evaluate all of the responses. An alternative, for example, if the council wanted to do a smaller dollar amount, would be to use those funds as a match towards future state broadband office grants. We don't have a deadline yet for when the State Broadband Office grant will open and when those funds will be awarded. So I don't have a specific information at this point, though. The council would just be awarding funds for purposes either to be a match and coordinate with a partner for purposes of state and federal grant applications, or alternatively, a specific amount that could be awarded to a local internet service provider for doing construction, and we would need to do an RFP process for that.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councillor Olson.
Thank you. So I agree with Councillor Medveji. I think this is a commitment that is important for us to make to our community, especially our rural community. What the project looks like, I think, is the question that maybe we have. So Lindsay, if we went out for an RFP, we would, I guess for me, I'm committed to this money to rural broadband, but I'm not clear as to what it would get for us. And so maybe either we say, yes, let's go ahead for discussion on the 16th today, or we say, let's include this in a future work session so we have a little bit better idea of what it is we would get for the money, or what the process would be to spend the money if we were to commit to it. So those would just be but I'm fully committed to this idea and this project and this money going to rural broadband.
So these, the specific project for the 4.646 that's here, this is a project that they are proposing in the northeast area of Battleground. And I'm happy if staff wants to pull up the staff report to walk through more project specifics, if that's what you're looking for. It's about 500 what they call passings, which are available internet connections for home or businesses. We of course don't know exactly how many people live in each home, so we can't say X number of people will be served, but they measure it on what's called passings. And so you can see the map there, the dark in the bottom, the lower left-hand corner where it looks a little bit darker green, just for reference, that's Battleground Lake. So you can kind of get an idea of where this is. The yellow that's shown there is admittedly a rough depiction, but that's where the Chalachi Prairie Railroad is. So you can get a sense of where this project would be. And there's a description there that it would extend from the northeast corner of Battleground Lake east to around 220th Avenue and north to the Hyson Bridge. And again, the yellow lake showing the Chalachi Prairie Railroad. The red lines show the proposed new core fiber lines, although the proposed project would serve 100% of the currently unserved and underserved areas in the project, in the blue shaded area. And as Councillor Medveji mentioned, these core fiber lines could then be used to expand rural broadband further out to the areas that surround this particular area. So when Comcast was looking at options for where they're seeing the highest density of unserved and underserved areas, that is close enough to the existing lines to have some, where it makes sense to go out and do that construction where they can serve 100% of the population, with those new high-speed fiber optic lines. This was the area that they applied for the State Broadband Office grants at the original round. At that point in time, there was a requirement for what's called open access network. And so that disqualified Comcast from their request statewide. It wasn't just Clark County. Since then, we've been working with the State Broadband Office to hopefully ensure that that's not a requirement for future grants. But Comcast did a lot of work in preparing this particular project for that grant application. The county, of course, supported that. We wrote a letter in support of that project and worked with Comcast as part of their application. So this particular project, they've gone and done the walkout. They've done, actually going out and counting all the poles and figuring out exactly what the project cost would be, and ensuring that they could service the entire area. So this is one that's shovel ready and ready to go. It's just awaiting funding.
Thank you for that. And my apologies for not reading this staff report in more detail. So I'm all in for moving forward for the 16th of August.
And then after that, if need be, we can always postpone it, and that could come out of our discussion on the 16th. Particularly if we decided to go forward in a little bit different way than the exact proposal here. I'm with you, Councillor Olson. Are you as well, Councillor Medveji?
I'm sorry. Yes, I was a thumbs up.
Okay, great. So that is three of us. So that would be on one of the items for the 18th. Is it the 18th or 16th? 16th.
The
Sorry about
16th.
that. The Battleground Aquatic Center is an item that seems to be the focus of a considerable question as to what actually is the status. And because of that, I think this is an item that merits considerable discussion for us to determine whether or not the council wishes to go forward with it. And I sense that there are differing opinions on that as well. So I would support moving that to a future work session. Would there be any others who feel that way as well? Councilor Lance,
I would support moving it to a work session.
a work session. Any others?
I would support moving it to a work session.
Okay, great. So let's do that. And we won't take it up per se on the 16th, but we will look at it in depth with a work session later. The small business grants and the nonprofit grants, I believe Councilor Rylander, you had wished to add those before. How would you like to see us proceed on those?
Actually, I believe those were Councillor Midvigi.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and that came from the discussion with basically our committee when we first started looking at the first $2 million that were allocated for what I think we all appreciated right off the bat, that we were talking apples and oranges and really weren't fairly considering small businesses because they really couldn't compete against the needs for the nonprofits. And additionally, we also had the notion at the time that there was going to be sufficient ARPA funding, that we were going to have a second year round for these grants. These were only one-year grants. Mark could probably talk more about it if he's on, but so we had proposed among us that we really should have a second year round of grants for both. And also, we really need to separate. And we're talking about businesses that didn't otherwise have relief from COVID-19 money or previous ARPA money. We should separate small businesses. If we want to infuse the small business with some of this ARPA money, we really needed a second round of a committee grant review. So that was the genesis of it. Had you seen all of the grant requests from small businesses, you would see that most of them were very worthy and in need if we were going to infuse some of the ARPA money into the small business community.
So given that, would you like to move these two items to the 16th for decision at that time?
Well, I would, especially in light of, if we set smaller dollar amounts in some of these other big ticket items, we may have the room to easily move that above the cut line.
Yeah, I concur with that. Is there a third person who does as well? Okay, so those two items then, Kathleen, will both be added to the 16th agenda. I'd like to, Mark Cassaway, are you online with us? I'm not sure that he is.
Yes, he's here in the hearing room. We're just getting his mic set up.
Oh, great. I just wanted to ask Mark, you've heard what we've talked about. Have we missed anything that we should know about from your perspective?
No, I think you've covered everything. There's a lot of additional information that we can provide for each one of these items, and I think your choice of moving those forward for further discussion is appropriate.
Okay. And Kathleen Otto, I ask you the same question.
I will just summarize really quickly of the items that we talked about. So for August 16th, we're going to have items 1, 4, 5, 6, 7,
I'm sorry.
9.
Wait just one moment and I'll catch up. Okay, go ahead.
1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 11, and 12. And also note the specific question about value added on number 5. Work sessions will include items 3, 8, and 10. And not now is item 2, which is the overtime, I believe, for the clerk's office. And we will get the work sessions scheduled as soon as we have availability on a Wednesday calendar.
Is that in concurrence with everyone else's notes? It is with mine as well. So I think we are then set. Is there anyone else we should ask for on staff that we should ask for input relative to what we have planned?
I don't think so at this time. We're getting feedback. Okay, it's fixed. Because I do think the additional information is going to be helpful for the council as you deliberate on moving forward. And like I said, we will try to get the work session scheduled as soon as we can because, you know, like on some of the space planning, we can't get some of the detailed numbers until we hire architect and engineer. So we will outline, you know, where we're at in some of the processes and what we need to actually solidify numbers. But we'll have some options on how we could creatively move forward and hopefully address all the requests for the ARPA funding.
And I noted in looking at the ARPA commitments, there is $2 million committed for that space planning consultant.
That is different than hiring the architect and engineer. The architect and engineer will actually go and walk into like the jail and really do the review and the analysis and how much it's going to cost for the specific technical pieces of that.
And who is doing that and how are they funded?
It's not funded right now. It's part of the $40 million that's being requested, and we would have to go out for an RFP as well. Another piece I'll just put out there, it would also include like the CJC relocation and family law annex. So there is some sensitive to timing on some of these. That's why I want to get this in front of council for at least a couple of the items. And I will note there, on a high level, there is conversations on the CJC and family law annex. There's some changes in who's managing the current property. We have not heard back from them, but there may be other options on moving forward with that. And hopefully by the work session, we'll have that solidified, and that will also lead the conversation on the funding. So thank you.
And as to that comment, Kathleen, I would like to know what that additional information is, not part of this, but maybe you could email or call me quickly.
Absolutely.
The council, is there anything else for the good of the order on this work session? Okay, that concludes the work session, and we will then move to council time. Let me